to be introducing David Ehrlichman, who is joining us today to kick off the entire festival. And as you know, David is a catalyst and coordinator of Converge, a network of practitioners who build and support impact networks. He's also the author of Impact Networks, Create Connection, Spark Collaboration, and Catalyze Systemic Change. And this is probably why a lot of you are here today and very curious. And I do highly recommend reading his book, which I had the privilege of reading over the past week. He's the producer of a documentary, Impact Networks, Creating Change in a Complex World. With his colleagues, he has helped form dozens of impact networks in a variety of fields and was a founding coordinator for networks in the fields of environmental stewardship, economic mobility, urban revitalization, and Web3. He lives in the Pacific Northwest and finds serenity in music and is completely mesmerized by his 10-month-old daughter. And so, David, I'd like to hand over the reins to you so you can start this presentation and to start off the festival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria and Brandon, and hi everybody. It's great to be with you all. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to be with us. Just a little bit of my background before I dig into some of the things that we've learned through this work I want to share with you. I was working in a nonprofit organization about 15 years ago here in the Coast Salish region, Seattle area. This particular nonprofit supported folks without shelter to get trained in and find jobs in the culinary industry. And they were doing incredible work, and they're still around today, do great work supporting individuals. And while I was there, I noticed that they were making tremendous impact on individuals, but they were working also in this massive broken system where there's just chronic lack of affordable housing in this region. And so I started to get really curious about how we could work not just in individual organizations, but really across organizations, across sectors, how we could bring public, private, nonprofit, social organizations, and others together to address these complex issues from many angles at once. And it was there that I started to get really curious about how we could work in this multi-stakeholder collaborative way. And I started to get exposed to early white papers from June Hawley and Valdez Krebs, net gains from Peter Plastrick, Madeline Taylor, started studying social movements and organizing. And that was a light bulb moment for me, that it was possible to work across organizations at a systems level. And I started to learn about networks that were actually staffed, like REAMP, which is 140 some organizations working to equitably reduce carbon emissions across 9 states in the Midwestern United States. There were people at the core of them who were not directing them, but supporting the group to discover what they can and want to do together, to foster connection and flows of information, coordinating the things that were already happening, and then finding opportunities to work together to affect the whole system. And I then became a network coordinator for a network in Fresno, California. I was there for 3 years, 48 different individuals and organizations working to revitalize their city, and then later Santa Cruz Mountains region. How do we steward 500,000 acres of land? We have to bring together all the different landowners and land managers to look at the system from the bird's eye perspective. And along the way, catalyzed Converge in 2013. Converge is just a network of people who support impact networks. And over the past 10 years now, really had the privilege of working with over 50 different networks and seeing that they're so different in terms of who's involved and what they're focused on and the context that they work in. But there's so much that's similar in terms of how they begin and the leadership that's required and some of the processes that they take to create connection, spark collaboration, and catalyze systemic change. And so started to get really curious how we could share these different lessons and patterns that we were seeing. That's what Impact Networks, the book, is about. It distills what we've learned through our own work with partners, as well as through interviewing over 40 network leaders from around the globe, became in contact with and was introduced to. And been really excited to get this book out in the world because we wanted to bring something that would help change makers like you to create an even greater impact by embracing a network approach to collaboration. And this book is not about me, it's not about Converge. It builds on the good work of so many people. It's really a culmination of works from across the field. And I want to share first just a 30-second trailer from the documentary, because it really centers the voices of 6 network leaders from around the world, and then share some of the key lessons that we've learned, and then happy to answer questions. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. One of my colleagues, Gabriel, is here. He can try to answer them in real time, and Maria will also capture them for some Q&A at the end. So before we dig in further, I just want to share this 30-second trailer of the documentary.
Nothing is in isolation, right? Everything is interconnected.
I think networks are probably the perfect structure for today's world.
To bring different people from different sectors to come together for a common goal and for a common good that then achieves something that wouldn't have otherwise happened if they hadn't come together.
With networks, we have the flexibility to innovate and to address challenges in real time.
I would say that networks in the end are going to show us the way forward.
So that's just a little teaser. I do hope you look at the full doc. It's 18 minutes is the full version, but there's also a 4-minute condensed version. And I do recommend it because it's...
So in just a few minutes.
Oops, YouTube is continuing. That's funny. Do check it out, because it really is about those who are on the ground doing this type of work, bringing people together and organizations together across all types of boundaries to address complex issues. Because as you know, our world is full of complexity, and that complexity is increasing rapidly. And we know, as Brandon said, we have to work together in unprecedented ways and at unprecedented scales. Addressing complex issues like social inequities and climate change, providing economic opportunity for all, these can't be solved by working alone. We have to work across organizations and across sectors. There's no single organization or institution who can do it by themselves, but we embark on collaborative efforts all the time. We think we know how to do that really well, but we're so often frustrated by the results. There's even a term out there, collaboration fatigue, for good reason. Why? Well, many reasons, but often it's because we're trying to structure these collaborations like we would an organization, as a hierarchy with some central authority directing the work and people fitting into very specific roles to move it forward. And we try to plan it all out in advance. We try to identify specific measurable outcomes for the effort before people have even had the chance to get together, to bring their different perspectives and views and identify what they can and want to do together. And that predicted control approach only works if we already know what needs to be done and how to do it. But complex issues are experienced very differently by different people. People are affected by these issues in different ways. Like this art installation here, they'll see things really differently depending on where they stand. So in our work to address complex issues, we can't plan it all out in advance. So we need to bring different actors together to make sense of the issue, to strengthen their ability to share information and share resources, to coordinate their work, and then to collaborate in ways that affect the whole system. And that's what it means to build a network for impact. And of course, this is not new. People have always formed networks. We've always worked in community with others to solve challenges we can't on our own. And so in many ways, I'm really talking about a return to the ways that humans have naturally connected for as long as we've been around, in community, in relationship. We can build on lessons from social movements and community building, indigenous wisdom, and generations of people who have worked in these ways for thousands of years. And then we can also incorporate new lessons from network science and systems thinking and embrace technologies and tools that help us coordinate at larger and larger scales. And we can also learn from examples of many other groups who have built networks like this to address complex issues, many of which you'll hear over the course of the next month. And we all know about the social networks that we come in contact with, whether in person or online. What many people don't realize is that networks can be deliberately formed and supported to do so much more, not just create connection, but also to support shared learning, flows of information, flows of resources, and to spark action, whether it's in a particular region or across a broad issue as in a movement. And so we define impact networks as networks that bring individuals and organizations together for learning and collaborative action for a shared purpose. And they often form like this. First, people are, and their organizations are working in scattered fragments. And this is from June Hawley and Valdez Krebs. Some people and organizations know each other and work together, but overall the system is fragmented. Information isn't flowing between these different clusters of activity. And so we need to find the purpose or purposes that might connect these groups together. Someone or some group sees the opportunity to connect these different parts of the system in a more deliberate way. But importantly, though, we need to move beyond this hub and spoke stage into a multi-hub network where information and resources are flowing across the network from person to person, organization to organization, without having to go through some centralized entity. And then over time, as the network grows, it becomes this dense core of activity, highly engaged people, and then a large and diverse periphery that serves as the source of new ideas and new connections to other networks. And of course, this is a static picture, but really it's vibrant, it's moving, it's active. People are coming in and out at different stages. And working in networks is really different from working in hierarchical organizations. And there's a key mindset shift that it takes. Often we work in our organizations and to see themselves kind of at the center of the universe. There are many other potential stakeholders situated around us that we could collaborate with to further our own mission. But the key shift here is to see ourselves as part of this larger interconnected system, different actors and different organizations. We're not the sun at the center of a solar system, even though we're usually the heroes of our own stories. Instead, we're one star in a huge and diverse constellation. So rather than putting yourself or your organization status or growth at the center of your focus all the time, try putting shared purpose at the center. What is a core issue that you care about that many other groups also care about? And then when we find that purpose or purposes that connect different groups together, we can work to strengthen those connections and flows of information between them. And that's, again, what it means to build a network. And it's also the first step of building an impact network, is finding that shared purpose. And just a couple metaphors to help make this point. We're not all in networks. We're not all in a single boat rowing at the same speed, going in the exact same direction. We're not going to end up at the finish line all at the exact same time. In the picture on the left, there's very little room to move. Everyone's in their seat. They're following orders to row in unison exactly. But networks are actually more like a group of kayaks, a group of autonomous vessels that are moving forward a bit into the unknown together. They might have a really good idea of where they want to end up, but along the way, each kayak has agency and choice, and they're free to adjust course and accommodate their own circumstances and needs. And the journey unfolds as they respond to their environment and the inspiration of any particular member. They stay in close communication with one another. They notify others about what they're seeing and sensing and interested in exploring, but by going together, they go farther than they could have by going alone. And one more metaphor here, rather than building a machine or structure, which we can plan out to exact specifications from point A to point B, there are lots of prior examples of bridges. We can have an exact blueprint to follow. Building a impact network is more like cultivating a garden. No two gardens are exactly the same. Every plant grows in relationship with its neighbors, the soil, the climate, and it's not possible to grow a garden overnight. It takes time for the plants to develop, no matter how much attention you give them. But we can provide nutrients and water. We can tend to the garden, provide pollinators and pull weeds. We can attend to whatever the garden needs in that moment. And we can also provide a bit of structure in the form of stakes or trellises to give plants support as they grow. We can even lay a path through the garden that others can follow. But we know if we impose our influence too much, if we walk on the plants, if we water them too much, we might mess things up. So like networks, we cultivate the gardens with care without trying to force it or control it. And networks are living systems. So they draw on lessons from how nature works. Like this murmuration of starlings, there are these beautiful swirling collectives that change shape and adapt in real time. And they're made up of individual entities, but the whole system stays connected through communication. As a result, something emerges that's greater than the sum of the parts. And so when you embrace the network mindset, we stop working in isolation, and instead we focus on cultivating connections. We start to notice more intently about how our efforts are related to others. Rather than scaling an individual organization up, we seek to scale out through connections and through collaboration with others. And so how our impact networks form, there are really 5 core activities that I've seen time and time again in effective networks, and they are: clarify purpose and principles, convene the people, cultivate trust, coordinate actions, and collaborate for systems change. And because we love alliteration to remember things, we call them the 5 C's, but just to touch briefly on each one. Clarifying purpose and principles. Purpose is what inspires people to join and contribute their time and energy. Impact networks, they cannot be controlled, but they can be oriented around a shared purpose. And then as the network clarifies its purpose, it's also really helpful to articulate shared principles, which are fundamental beliefs about how network members intend to conduct themselves and work together in pursuit of that purpose. So if we have values, the things that we hold dear, principles are how do we put those values into action when we're making decisions and taking actions. Principles operationalize values. And this is where many networks have embedded equity in their work. In their purpose, as I said earlier, REAMP's purpose is to equitably reduce carbon emissions across the Midwest. Or in their principles, taking actions to advance racial equity is a key principle that drives the work of Sterling Network NYC. And so principles surround the purpose. They create guidelines for how the network will make collective decisions. Together, purpose and principles create a foundation for both vibrant but also coherent self-organization. And then meanwhile, we create opportunities for people to become connected virtually, in person, individually, and also all at once in convenings that bring the whole network together. Convenings are something that shows up consistently across networks, bringing the whole network together. The time to build relationships, to understand each other's work, to identify points of leverage where we could move together. When considering who to engage, to quote Adrienne Marie Brown, bring together those who, well, 1, are directly impacted by the issue, 2, are doing compelling work on the issue, and 3, can move the work forward. Convening people doesn't mean inviting them into your thing. It means inviting them into co-creating what's possible now that they're part of the group. So every person who joins an impact network has the opportunity and to some extent responsibility to contribute to its development. And as people are brought together, the next focus is to cultivate relationships of trust. And that means taking the time to understand what each other cares about and needs, to build deep human connection so that we can have the honest conversations that are necessary. We build trust not so that we like each other. We actually don't need to like each other to be able to work together. We build trust not so that we agree with everything. It's actually so that we can hold the tension through the inevitable disagreements and conflicts that we'll face. So we can hang in there long enough until we can find a slice of common ground, or at least have a greater shared understanding of each other's perspectives. And as we build trust, we can coordinate actions, build on the things that are already happening by creating stronger flows of information and knowledge and resources across the network. And these flows create stronger systems, just like how the trees of a forest share resources thanks to the mycelial networks underneath the ground that connect them together. So we can find opportunities for people to support each other's work and find quick wins that makes participating in the network a really valuable use of their time. And to give you an example of how these connections and flows can evolve as networks form, here's a series of 3 network maps from Sterling Network NYC, which is a network of 48 different organizational leaders working to advance economic mobility across 5 boroughs by building this cross-sector network. And before the network was formed, a survey was taken and it generated this map. Each organizational leader is a circle here. Their primary sector is the color, and a connecting line in this case is regular communication between those 2 leaders and therefore their 2 organizations as well. So this, again, is a map showing the state of connectivity across the network before the first convening. Some organizational leaders here were communicating regularly with 1 or 2 others, but by and large, the system is pretty fragmented, scattered fragment stage. And over the course of the year, took the time to build relationships, understand each other's work, find opportunities to support each other. You can see information is flowing and people are finding new and different ways to work together. You can also see that the network recognized it had some gaps in terms of who was involved. So it invited members from a new sector represented by the purple circles. And then over the course of the next year, the network brought in yellow circles, which weren't there before. And at this point, you can see that network has that dense core periphery structure we talked about, which means information and resources are flowing from person to person, organization to organization, all in service of their shared purpose of advancing economic mobility. And then finally, in addition to coordinating the things we're already doing, we can collaborate in new ways to create change at the systems level. And that requires making collective sense of what's happening from many different perspectives, bringing our pieces of the puzzle together to see the big picture and take action on key leverage points, places where Danilo Mendes has said, a focused effort on one thing can create big changes throughout the whole system. Just one example here in the case of Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network, which brings together 24 different organizations to steward 500,000 acres of land. To steward a large landscape, you have to take a systems approach, because think about it, if you're just focused on your parcel of land and you eradicate the invasive species, for example, from your piece of land, if your neighbor hasn't done the same, it doesn't much matter. So we have to take a systemic approach to this type of work. So this particular network brings together government agencies and land trusts and tribal groups and academic institutions and timber companies. And these groups disagreed about a lot of things, but they also recognized over time that they shared the ecological and cultural importance of the land, and they found key opportunities to collaborate that would support all their work. They brought their data sources together to create this massive, first of its kind, region-wide vegetation map that really supported their efforts to reduce the risk of catastrophic wildfire, which is a huge issue in the region. They also noticed how the permitting processes for environmental restoration work were overly burdensome. It took a lot of time. The permitting processes for restoring a creek bed was basically the same as for building a new condo. And so they collectively brought it up to the state. Now it's a key initiative of the state of California. It's called Cutting Green Tape, to reduce the cost and time necessary for important environmental restoration work. As I begin to close here, I just want to share two more things that have stood out in the networks that I've seen and worked with. Many people assume that networks like this just happen, that people will self-organize spontaneously. And all that can happen, it usually only goes so far. The truth is that leadership always matters. It's just a very different form of leadership than the one we see in hierarchical environments. Rather than defining rigid structures and rules, network leaders nurture a culture of trust and reciprocity. Instead of command and control, they seek to connect and collaborate. They're not there to tell people what to do, but to foster self-organization and to support others to discover what they can and want to do together. These are people who seed the vision for change and inspire networks to form. They help the network clarify its purpose and principles. They share power, facilitating collective decision-making and creating opportunities for other people to step into leadership in a variety of ways. And network leaders demonstrate an incredible amount of care for these networks. They take responsibility to nurture its growth and consistently anticipate its needs and challenges, while also sharing that responsibility completely with others. And impact networks, second, also need some degree of structure. But the key here is that they only need a minimum viable structure, just enough to provide support, like a trellis in a garden, but not too much to stifle emergence and creativity. The form should follow function, so the structure can emerge as it's needed. The enabling infrastructure of a network might include things like mechanisms for forming teams to focus on a specific piece of work, the online communication platforms where we'll share information and resources, processes for making collective decisions, participation agreements, and so forth. And then finally, before I leave you, I just want to double down on a point I made earlier, which is it's all about relationships. It's what makes it all work. Networks, fundamentally, networks are just webs of connections, webs of relationships connecting people or things. And so networks are only as strong as the connections that tie them together. If at any point you feel unsure about how to proceed in this work, invest in relationships. To be a network leader is first and foremost to weave the threads that tie us together. And that's how our fragmented systems can become creative, adaptive, and interconnected whole. With that, I want to turn it back to Maria and also share that we have a network toolkit that's totally free, open to use, Creative Commons. Check it out. It has facilitation guides and surveys. I hope you use it and adapt it in your own work. And that's at our website. And I want to turn it to Maria and answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That was really inspiring, and you can see by the sparkles that were happening in the chat that there was a lot of really good interactivity that happened as you were speaking, and it really has sparked a lot of questions for me, and I think a lot of questions for those, and we can kind of interdisperse between some of my questions and some of the questions that have come up. And really maybe a good place to start, you kind of gave a background on why, what allowed you to spark your interest in working in this area. And I guess I was really struck by this quote, to think it just is how you ended your presentation from your book. And I just have to say that I devoured your book very quickly. So I would highly recommend to anybody to take the time to read it. It's not a very, very long book, so you can really delve into it very quickly. But I was really struck by this quote: in a world of impact networks, building relationships is the work. So why is building the relationships the key? So you mentioned that a number of times. So why is that the key component of building impact networks?
Yeah, when we come together in collaboration, so often we want to, or some people at least want to jump to action right away. We need to get things done. But when we move too quickly to action without building that foundation of shared understanding and mutual respect, inevitably we're going to run into disagreements and conflicts and miscommunications. And so if we haven't taken the time to build that foundation of trust, then when we reach that point of conflict, things will break down. I've seen this so often. People turn away and they don't continue forward through the hard parts of collaboration, and collaborating is hard. And so we talk about going slow initially to build that foundation of connectivity and trust so that we can go faster later. If we've taken the time to understand what each other cares about and needs, we also start seeing each person as a deep soul, an incredible human being, not just kind of the professional role or the organization that they're representing. And so we can dig in much deeper. We can hold attention through those inevitable disagreements and conflicts, and we may be able to find that slice of common ground where we too agree, and we can work together on that thing. But as we run into those different roadblocks, we can fall back on that foundation of trust that will carry us through.
That's the essence, is the human connection that we're talking about. And as you know, as we've been working in the last 2 years in an online capacity, the ability to be able to build relationships even in these virtual capacities, I think it's really shown our ability to do that in a very deep way. And I think Nexus is another good example of how that can be done. Almost everybody that I was involved in the steering group with Nexus, I've never met them in real life, but we've met so many times virtually, and we've developed that kind of, like you said, the mutual respect and that trust and that understanding to be able to build what we've seen with Nexus today. So I think that's really great. You kind of touched on this in your presentation, David, and I just wonder if you'd kind of give a little more of an elaboration on the distinction between the kinds of networks that you talk about in your book. You talk about learning, action, and movement networks. Can you maybe just kind of go through those a bit so that people can kind of think about identifying the kind of networks that they're involved in and how that might be helpful as they progress their networks?
Of course. As I mentioned earlier, we all know about the social networks in our lives, and some are really amazing and wonderful and regenerative, and some we may see as destructive. Social networks are connections, and sometimes they're strong connections, sometimes they're weak connections, but it's all about really connection. But we can deliberately form and support networks, not just for connection, but also for shared learning, sharing information with one another, sharing resources. That's what we call learning networks, like communities of practice, some associations, lots of different forms of learning networks. And by the way, I use the term impact networks as a big tent definition. It's kind of the lowercase impact networks, because there are many different forms of collaboratives and partnerships and so forth. And so using that big tent definition, learning networks take a lot of forms. The Fire Adopted Communities Learning Network is a great example. FACnet is the abbreviation. The IMPT, Initiative for Multipurpose Prevention Technologies, an example there of a global learning network that is connecting academic researchers and product developers and various institutions to advance these multipurpose prevention technologies for women, provide STD prevention and contraception at the same time. And they're sharing information. They're not explicitly taking action together on one thing. We're not pushing collaboration necessarily. It may emerge naturally, but really the focus of this network is creating pathways for the flows of information and learning on what we're doing. So those are learning networks. Action networks then incorporate all of that and take the next step to actually identify specific pieces of action, specific projects or specific leverage points that we might collaborate on that would support our individual work or our collective work. And so action networks have a bit more structure. You know, project teams, they may have a core team that's providing governance support. So building the structure as is needed. REAMP is an example of an action network. The Santa Cruz Mountain Stewardship Network is an action network. And then there are also movement networks there, which are really networks of networks. The way that many social movements are structured, Leslie Crutchfield's book, How Change Happens, is a good example of this, but there are local chapters, kind of local networks that are taking action. They're relatively autonomous. They're making decisions of what makes sense for them locally, identifying local leaders to support them, but they're also connected together as part of this larger movement. They have a common sense of purpose. They have some shared principles that tie the different chapters together. They have flows of communication so that when there's an opportunity to all come out to the streets or a big whirlwind moment, there can be coordination between these different local networks. And so it's this combination of locally focused smaller networks that are tied together in this larger movement network. So those are really the three primary forms I've seen of impact networks: learning networks, action networks, and movement networks.
I really like that because it really kind of allows people to think about, where different things are positioned. Because even if you think about the Nexus network as it's been formed, even in its early stages, it's very much a learning network, but it has the potential to do so much more. So it is this idea that it can kind of build upon itself to work towards potentially the action and the movement components of network. But a lot of the times it's at the moment it's for the purposes of learning and allowing social network leaders to be able to interact and to learn from each other. And so that's where they are. And I think that that's an important component, is to be able to reflect on, like, why are we here? That's the whole purpose kind of component, and allow us to think about that.
And I would say that's great. Networks don't need to move towards the action network or movement network. It's better to be a really vibrant learning network where people are engaging and getting value out of it and identifying new opportunities to share information and resources, rather than being kind of a middling action network. I see a lot of networks that think we need to take action together, we need to do something together, but really this is actually better suited as a really vibrant learning network, and it's okay to embrace that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm also very intrigued by the idea that about the power that you talk about in your book around boundary spanners, the idea of bridging between the clusters of a network. And I know if I extend that metaphor even further, you talk about just in your presentation there about the different unique gardens that we have. So perhaps we're thinking about those different gardeners that are cultivating these different gardens around the place. I can guarantee that in this tuning in today are a lot of these kind of boundary spanners, these bridgers, these gardeners. Why is their work within a network really important?
Yeah, it's one of the key network leadership roles, I would say. I see 4 primary leadership roles that arise over and over again in networks. And that is one of them that you just spoke of, which we call network weaving, which is connecting people together, between different clusters of activity, finding opportunities where people may be able to support each other work. A lot of people just do this intuitively, where they're making introductions, they're noticing potential connections between different organizations or individuals or systems or pieces of work, and connecting those different clusters of activity together are so critical. On those network maps, you see sometimes the people who they look like they're on the periphery, maybe they're less connected in this particular network, but I always have to set the context when I'm sharing those maps that's just, they look like they're on the periphery just in the context of the specific dots on that map. They are themselves connected to so many other communities and groups and other networks. And so they're so important as bridges to those other networks, bringing new ideas and new information, new experiences in. So weaving is a critical network leadership role. Just to go through the other three briefly, catalyzing the folks who bring people together, see the opportunity that spark, catalyzing a specific conversation or catalyzing a specific project team to move a piece of work forward. So the work of catalyzing something. Then facilitation, the folks who are facilitating conversations, who are helping mediate conversations. And then finally, coordination, a lot of the back of the house, the essential infrastructure that we need, that's often behind the scenes, but so critical for our collective work.
And you also mentioned in your presentation, I think it's worth kind of reiterating this idea of networks and mindset. And you make that distinction between that hierarchical mindset that's common within Western society, where you have the organization at the center, and you had that kind of image of that organization at the center and all of the spokes that come from the center, versus a network mindset where you talk more about placing the common purpose at the center. Can you maybe elaborate on why or how you can make that shift, maybe from thinking of the organization at the center to thinking of a purpose at the center, and why that would be valuable to make that shift?
It can definitely be challenging or take time for people who have been grown up and only worked in hierarchical environments their whole life. And through school and work, it's I was working in only hierarchical environments until I started to get into this work as well. And the shift is to see that we're one star in this huge and diverse constellation, right? We're not the sun at the center of a solar system, to use a metaphor. And a really great way to help people make that shift of recognizing that, this shift of focus from me to we is convenings. It's part of the beauty of this act of convening the whole system or the network together, because then we can start to experience more than just we see our piece of the work, but we see it in the context of the bigger picture. We recognize that we're each bringing a piece of the puzzle, and we also see and experience these different issues very differently depending on where we stand and the work that we're focused on. But when we convene different pieces of the puzzle together, we can see the big picture. We have a better chance of understanding where those points of leverage are. We can also identify ways to support each other's existing work, and recognize that each one of us has a really valuable role to play in this work, and that to address these complex issues, it's never going to be one action or one group who can do it alone. We have to address these issues from many different angles at once as part of this smart and coordinated effort.
Yeah, that's so true. And I'm just going to encourage now people, because of the time, that if people have any other burning questions, and I'm seeing a lot of responses happening in the chat at the same time as we're kind of answering some of the questions. But if anybody has any other questions, please put them in the chat and we can do our best. I know that Victorine had a question about one of some of the institutions that are developing network leadership, and I saw some of the responses that were coming out. So even within this kind of Nexus community, people are already responding to provide some of those helpful responses. That's right from the group, and this is the right kind of group that can be able to have those kinds of responses.
And that's one of just to share one of my favorite tools, which is in the toolkit, converge.net/toolkit, called Rapid Coordination, which is at each opportunity, convening or even meeting, sometimes we'll just create the space for people to share requests and offers. Something I need is ... Could be very specific, could be a conversation you want to have, could be a conference space, whatever it may be. Something I need is ... And then immediately have others raise their hand that they might be able to help with that need or make a connection or have a conversation. It's not the time to have the conversation, but to connect those dots, and then they can have the conversation afterwards. And then you ask, what's something you can offer to support each other's work too? And then folks will step up and say, something I can offer is connection to this, something I can offer is some research I did, my time and energy, whatever it might be, and other people can follow them up like that. That is it. Sometimes it often just takes 20 minutes at most. And it's a beautiful way of coordinating the things that people are already doing, and also recognizing that we come to these collaborative efforts with self-interest as well. We often come to these efforts and are focusing these efforts on the shared interest that brings us together. That makes a lot of sense. But also we have self-interest for ourselves, our organizations, our constituents, and we need to get something out of these collaborative efforts to make it worth our time, to allow us to continue to participate, or our organizations to participate. And so we're integrating both self-interest and shared interest, and that's a great way to do that.
And it really does help to foster a lot of that trust you talked about earlier, and that mutual respect and all of those things, to be able to do that in an environment where there is that balance between, asking, and giving. So that's a really good point. I also just wanted to ask you a question. I know that the Nexus network, when we set up, it was an important component of the network was to ask the network, the Nexus Global Network members to sign up to a charter. And I just wonder about why you see that a charter is important for an impact network.
Well, it's just a helpful way of distilling our collective agreements and our shared purpose and principles. I think it's so often so helpful to capture those in writing, so that we can refer back to them, so that we could share them with others who are coming in. They're living documents. I see charters, or whatever you want to call them, as they're living documents. We can continue to revise them and refine them as more people become engaged, and as things evolve. But it's capturing our collective agreements in writing, so that we can refer to them and bring new people on. And so charters are often, they capture why we're here, our overall purpose, principles, what do we care about, and how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to that. And then sometimes a bit more about who this network is for, and what our collective priorities might be. But again, living documents, so they evolve as the networks evolve.
Yeah, great. There's a good question here in the chat from Tamara Tamara. Sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right, but it's what's your perspective on how impact networks compare to Bridgespan's concept of field building or any other network model theory? Ooh, that's a lot.
Right. There's FSG's collective impact, particular approach to collaboration. Other groups have their specific models for it. I see impact networks as, again, the big tent definition. That the concepts that I've shared here and in the book, I believe apply to any one of these different kind of network building or field building practices. It's kind of the underlying, what does it take to build connectivity and coordination and collaboration, kind of whatever the particular structure or issue. So, on another call, we could go a lot deeper into kind of the compare and contrast with the FSG model, which that's collective impact, which really emphasizes kind of shared measurement systems, and is often institution driven. And we're planning kind of in advance. We have very specific outcomes, and the work that I often do kind of starts with the connections and bring people together, and then through that we'll collectively discover what those things are, and we can identify our shared measurement systems rather than the other way around. But there's a lot of nuance, and those initiatives are also very different when you compare them against each other. So all that to say, I see impact networks as the big tent and kind of fundamental principles underneath a lot of this work.
Great. There's a couple of comments and a question that starts around collaboration fatigue and the drive. This is from Bill, and then there's a follow-up there from Katie, and it says, and the drive towards action early. What has been helpful for networks you've worked with to be patient in developing relationships and still see progress enough to stay at it? Oh, that's a
totally.
Challenge.
Well,
I
would refer back to that rapid coordination thing I talked about. What's the self-interest that people are also coming into these networks and collaborations with, and let's really acknowledge those. It's it often seems taboo to state our self-interest or what we need to get for ourselves, our organizations, our constituents, but we have to honor self-interest, and really honoring that, and also creating space for people to share both their gives and gets early on is a great way for folks to get something out of it that's working for them, and also shows the value, immediate value, the kind of finding some quick wins of supporting each other, and creating different connections across the network that didn't previously exist. So that's a key way is really upfront kind of honoring and creating space for that self-interest, because the longer term systems level work, it does take a lot of time. It's hard, and it's hard to show that direct kind of causation. But along the way, we can measure process metrics. We can show through network mapping, for example, that connectivity and communication and coordination is increasing. We can show the increasing density of the network over time. We can also survey participants. Are they getting value out of it themselves, organizations, with their constituents? Are they getting something out of the network that they didn't previously? And so in the back of the book, there's an evaluation process that's social network connectivity, the network health, the kind of administrative things you can track. And then also you'll notice that then people do just spontaneously find ways to support each other, and capturing that and capturing the stories can be a really great way of expressing that lots of things are happening, good things are happening on the road toward that longer term change that we seek.
I just to end, because I know that I can't believe how quickly this hour has really flown by, and it's been really insightful, David. So maybe just to end off, if you wanted to leave us with either 3 key actions or ideas that you'd like people to take away from today's session.
Sure. I think the first is to recognize the value and the importance of networked leadership. One of my missions in life is to raise the profile of these network leaders, and because they're so critical, but so often behind the scenes and don't get the credit that I think they should, or the resources. And but that's also to say that leadership can come from anyone at any time in these networks. So it's the decentralized, distributed kind of version of leadership here. Second, I think just to double down on that self-interest, shared interest point, recognize that both are important. A lot in this work, we're recognizing tensions. We have shared interest. We also have self-interest. We want to take action, but we also need to build relationships. We're thinking of the whole. We also have our individual pieces. And so we're holding these different tensions, but integrating and honoring both self and shared interest in this work. And then lastly, again, return on relationships, invest in relationships. It's really what makes this all work.
Great, thank you. And that, yeah, as you mentioned, that the power of the human connection to be able to have impact is just is really fundamental. And you're a lot of people are getting a lot of energy out of this chat. So I'm just gonna, I think, turn things back to Brendan. Thank you so much, David. I really enjoyed, I really highly recommend reading the book. We call it good fireside reading here in Ireland. So, put on a nice little fire and just enjoy the read.